Stern. We'll talk about the team and the expectations coming up and what you took away from A10 Media Days yesterday. But I always ask coaches or players this, and especially media members heading into a season. It seems normal now, right? Like, is this the first normal, like this first normal start to the season for a while for you? I'm sure. I mean, I remember you and Mike Hartsock and others were heading to Brooklyn, where you just got back from for the A10 tournament, of course, and then that's when the whole world flipped upside down. But a sense of normalcy, I'm sure, is well received from you, I'm assuming.
That was my first question when I sat down at the round table with Anthony Grant yesterday. Was it surreal to be back here at the Barclays Center? And I said, did you even get to the Barclays Center in 2020 before it was canceled? He said he was on his way to the arena. And so was I. I flew into New York City that morning, March 12th, 2020, knowing that it was probably going to get canceled, but it wasn't official yet. And I got there just in time for the press conference where they announced the cancellation. Mike Rhodes from VCU and Matt McCall of UMass were there to talk for the conference. And then we met Neil Sullivan, Dayton's AD, outside the arena with Mike Hartsock and Jack Pohl. So it was worth it going, because we got that reaction, but it was a very sad day that we closed off at a famous restaurant in Brooklyn, Juniors. And yesterday, the first time back at that arena, at least since that day. So it was crazy, and it was back to normal, and it was great being in person, seeing Archie Miller again for the first time. Last time I saw him was on the sideline at the Indiana-Ohio State game in 2017. When he saw me sit down with that camera, he's like, there's that camera. He's used to me shooting this photo for so many times over 4 years. He said, there's that camera. I was like, yep, you're deep in my archives, but now I got some new shots of you. So it was a cool day being in Brooklyn yesterday.
Yeah, and with that being said, you're talking about that sense of normalcy now. There was a lot of reasons why the Flyers started out slow last year, but I mean, the fan base, there was just that lull of that hangover, I guess, from the disappointment of not getting to see that 20 team really, show off in the NCAA tournament that year. Was there a sense in your time covering this team? Did you sense that as well? I know it was a lot of new players and not a lot of players on that 20 roster that had come back, but did you get a sense of that disappointment that maybe it took a while to really get over that, of never really having that opportunity to kind of put that talent on full display from the year before?
Right. That 1-3 start was just the latest blow to the fan base after the cancellation of the 2020 postseason. The 2021 season was awful for a lot of programs, but I mean, everybody was going through the same thing, really no excuses. But Dayton had, enough seniors should have had a stronger season, didn't, settled for another NIT bid, never really contended in the A10. So it was just it was not a fun season, or not an enjoyable season in any way, especially with fans not at the arena. It was like, why are we even here? Mm-hmm. And then last year, you got all this excitement, these new players. Nobody really knows what to expect, and it looked like it was going to be a disastrous season after the 3 straight home losses. So a lot of credit to those guys for turning the season around when it could have gone the other way for sure, and turn it around fast with 3 victories in Florida, especially the victory over Kansas. So it was a fun season, but ultimately disappointing because of the ending. And then yet another blow to the fans and to the Flyers with Malachi Smith's injury in Brooklyn, the first team left out of the NCAA tournament. You just can't write that kind of script for what Dayton had already been through. So I think Dayton fans hope this is the season they're rewarded for their suffering, and the same goes for the Flyers and the coaches, because they've been through a lot in the last couple of years.
We have David Jablonski with us, covers the Dayton Flyers for the Dayton Daily News. Just got back from Brooklyn from the A10 Media Days yesterday. And to the surprise of nobody, the Dayton Flyers, of course, for the upcoming season, with so much talent returning and a lot of expectations, they're the A10 preseason favorites. Obviously, that's not a surprise to you or anybody else out there. But you're right. It seems that they've had enough blows. The fan base, the program itself, they've had the highs of highs and the lows of lows over the last year and a half. It's time to put that behind them. And now it just seems like, okay, it's full steam ahead. We have a lot of expectations, a lot of, I think it's a good balance of experienced talent from a season ago with some talented newcomers coming in. This is obviously going to be one of the deeper teams for Anthony Grant, in your opinion. Your expectations for this team, obviously not just as the preseason favorite, but a very talented group heading in, most likely going to be a top 25 team when those preseason rankings come out.
Right. I just submitted I voted in the AP poll and submitted my poll today. It was due today. I have Dayton number 20, St. Louis number 21. Gonzaga is my top pick, although it could have been North Carolina just as easily. I think those are probably the 2 teams that are going to get most of the first place votes. But yeah, this is the first time I've ever even been tempted to vote for Dayton in 3 seasons, voting in the poll. The last 2 seasons, obviously, they didn't come close to capturing the attention of the voters. Even with that victory over Kansas, he still had those 3 terrible losses behind them last year. So, yeah, they'll be number 20. I'm glad I don't have to worry about being a homer because I think most people will have them ranked. They should be in the top 25 in the preseason, which hasn't happened for quite a while. Even that 29-win team a couple years ago only got 1 vote in the preseason poll.
Yeah.
So this is a whole different scenario. Lots of hype for this team. There are certainly no guarantees. Injuries certainly could change things for every team, but you're right. They have the depth to maybe overcome any injuries. And the depth to get them over the hump of a long season and maybe avoid some of those those landmines in the A10 that have always hurt Dayton teams over the years. And they got to win some of those non-conference games too in the battle for Atlantis. Tough early schedule. Yeah. UNLV early in the season. SMU, this is their 2nd game. UNLV is the 3rd game, so they're going to be tested early and often. And so we'll find out what they're made of.
Yeah, Wyoming, and another NCAA tournament team from a season ago. Definitely going to be well tested in the non-conference. It's interesting. I remember Archie Miller-led teams. They were the great underdog, and then when they would crack that top 25, that it just always seemed they would have that suffering loss right after that. They were never able to sustain it when they would have reached that peak. Anthony Grant-led teams seem to be different. Now, I know we're basing it off of that 2020 season, but it never seemed like the pressure got to them when they cracked that top 25, and they almost fed off of it. Is that the sense you're getting here? Because this is a much different scenario. They're not heading into the season, off the radar and having to prove themselves. Now they're having to prove themselves just in a different way. They have to prove that they're worthy in the eyes of the non-Power 5, worshipers out there, that they're worthy of being in the top 25. Your thoughts on how that can maybe change the approach for this team, having the expectations being so high heading in, maybe a little bit different than in years past?
You're right. Everybody expected that 2020 team to falter at some point and drop in the polls.
Yeah.
That's what always happened in the past to Archie's teams. They would get there and then, lose right away, and they would have to fight their way back or maybe not even get back in the poll. So that was different. This team, right, still has to prove itself, especially with everybody coming after it this season. It knows it's going to be the hunter. That was said a lot yesterday. You're not the hunter now. You're the hunted. They will have the targets on its. They will have the target on their back. That was said a million times yesterday. All the cliches were used, but it's really true. Teams are going to want to play Dayton. If they're in the top 25, they're going to want to play well against Dayton. It's going to be a big opportunity for everybody that does play them as long as they're in the poll. But right, they weren't ranked at all last year. They got to, back up that ranking. Assuming they get it on Monday. The poll comes out at noon on Monday, and we'll find out where Dayton is ranked. And after that, it's all on the Flyers. But they have all the tools to live up to it.
It's funny. I remember that the season after, or last season, I guess, heading into last season, Sully, Sully, him and I had this conversation about, it sounds weird and there's going to be a hot take of mine, but I feel like that 2020 season could be a bad thing for the future of the expectations of teams, because a good 2022-23 team may not be that 2020 team, and so it may not feel the same. And the same thing even for Deron Holmes heading into this season. Obviously, a lot of expectations for him, but it's like, man, if they're not as good as 2020, will it feel the same? If he's not as good as Obi Toppin, will it feel the same? Obviously, Flyers fans aren't dumb. They know what they're watching, but you know what I mean? Like, having to compare the success of this team to that 2020 team, is it fair to hold that standard to this team heading in your opinion?
Well, like it or not, they will be compared to that team a lot every step of the way, at least as long as they're winning. But it will be very hard to live up to that success. 29 wins, 18-0 in the A10. One, I think the A10 is better than it was that year. VCU was the favorite that year and kind of fell apart, did not have a good season at all. And Dayton wasn't challenged that much. It had a couple close games. St. Louis almost beat it. Jalen Kutcher saved the Flyers there, but wasn't as good a St. Louis team as the St. Louis team that Dayton will face this year. So 16-2 or 17-1, even 15-3 might be better than 18-0 considering the state of the conference this year. So yeah, they will be compared, but you have to put it in perspective too and realize it's a different team, different season, and it's hard to compare different seasons over a couple of years.